What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Very Cold Lasagna, the podcast that has the safe and open listening platform for all the casual, cold, and dumb takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Welcome to today's episode number 96 of this freezing cold podcast that houses the icy and spicy lasagna with all the takes in that very cold fridge. So, man, we're getting close to 100 episodes here on this show, and to be honest with you, I don't know really what to do to commemorate 100 episodes, to be honest with you. But I mean, for some people, they like to commemorate it. For me, I mean, it's okay, 100 episodes, woohoo! I mean, I'll think of something. I will think of something to commemorate 100 episodes, doing this for a year. I mean, I haven't even commemorated 1 year. I mean, it's just a year of me doing this and doing this for 100 episodes. I mean, crazy to believe that I've committed something this hard to do for over 100 episodes to do. But anyway, here we are, almost 100 episodes in. Thank you for everyone that tunes into the show, like the small amount of people that do still, and you know, your support still means the world to me. It really does. But anyway, we still have the meat and potatoes to go into this episode, which is our March Madness, even though the real March Madness is going on in the NCAA tournament. But if you want to tune into this March Madness, we're still talking about our NFL season recaps for the 2021 season. We have our part 4 for this episode. We're going to be talking about the 6 teams that were in the first round of the NFL playoffs, but sadly didn't get past that point. So before we get into the main topic of today, before we get into our season recaps, we had a little bit of free agency moves that happened. Obviously, some smaller ones, some bigger ones that happened. I think I covered most of them last week in the last episode. Even if I didn't, there were some post updates to the clips that were released throughout the week. If I didn't get to them, let me know. However you can. But the biggest move that happened in the free agency period so far, aside from, you know, Russell Wilson getting traded to the Denver Broncos, Aaron Rodgers staying with the Green Bay Packers, what was the other big move that happened? Oh yeah, there was a certain quarterback, you know, that hasn't been playing for about a year because of, you know, this very touchy thing that's going on with some sexual allegations that's been happening, and that quarterback has finally been traded to a team. Yes, Desean Watson of the Houston Texans has finally been traded. He's finally waived his no trade clause to the Cleveland Browns. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, the Cleveland Browns. Why? What's all teams? The skid marks. He waived this no trade clause for the damn skid marks. So, pretty much Cleveland, for a team that could have had Desean Watson in 2017 with the first overall pick, they decided not to get Desean Watson there, but they decided to trade away all their first round picks in the next 3 years. They're giving up their first round pick this year, their 2023 first round pick, and their 2024 first round pick, as well as some third round selections and fourth round selections in the next couple of years for a quarterback that may be suspended in for half of the season next year. I mean, we get to, I know it's going to be a big price to pay for whoever was going to acquire him, but of all the teams Desean Watson wanted to go to was the skid marks. In Houston, it was already bad. The thing I don't get personally for me, is that, I mean, I guess it makes Cleveland a better football team on the field, but for in terms of off the field, Desean Watson was already in a shitty organization with a shitty owner that he clearly wanted to get away from. But what would make the situation better by going to another shitty organization? Wouldn't you want to go to somewhere like New Orleans, you know, where you could win with a great a great leadership group, a really good roster, and maybe put some more weapons around Desean Watson in New Orleans because you don't know what's going to happen with Michael Thomas. And there was also the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, Arthur Blank's okay as an owner, and then you just have to build around Watson. I mean, sure, it's not like as ideal of a roster as New Orleans was, and Desean Watson is from Atlanta. It just doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't make sense that Watson decided to go to Cleveland, of all places, to play for an organization that's just as nearly as crappy in terms of leadership as the Houston Texans was. I mean, the Texans are far worse, but I mean, I guess from one crappy organization to another. But it's whatever Desean Watson wants to do, I guess. But either way, he's finally away from the Houston Texans. This saga is over, and we can finally focus on other important things, like getting Jimmy Garoppolo's ass out of the 49ers. But either way, still some things to be resolved for Watson and the Cleveland Browns in terms of the civil suits and the NFL's investigation and what verdict they're going to hand down, and whether or not Desean Watson is going to get suspended next season, or if at all. So that remains to be seen. For the Browns, clearly a massive upgrade over Baker Mayfield. Now they're trying to ship off Mayfield. Mayfield already requested a trade prior to the Browns getting Desean Watson. So they denied the trade request. Obviously, getting Desean Watson, there's no need to deny the request. They could just go through with expediting Baker Mayfield's request, getting him out of town. My ideal trade spot would be, I don't know, the Seahawks. Just to get him, to a team that could use a new quarterback. I know Seattle fans won't like that, but I mean, would any other team really want Baker Mayfield at this point? I don't know. So I guess you could call it a neutral win for both sides, I guess. But for me personally, I just don't know. Why Desean Watson would choose Cleveland over teams like New Orleans or Atlanta. It doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. So those are just my thoughts on the Desean Watson trade. Obviously, there were other big things that happened in the NFL, but obviously the biggest one, one of the biggest ones, came this past week, and the ones we already talked about the previous week. So, damn, this AFC is pretty stacked. This AFC is pretty damn stacked. You got Desean Watson in Cleveland. You got Russell Wilson in Denver. Josh Allen, obviously, and Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow throughout the AFC. This is going to be a bloodbath. This is really going to be a bloodbath in the AFC. It's like the survival of the fittest. It's like Mortal Kombat in the AFC. Like, what do you really have in the NFC? I mean, besides Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know if Trey Lance decides to, it quickly develops in year 2. I don't know. All you really have is Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. That's it. So, goddamn. So, we'll see what happens there. And whatever happens in the rest of free agency. But for now, we're heading towards the draft. There's probably not going to be much big moves happening the rest of the way in free agency. But, damn. This free agency period has been pretty wild so far. It's been pretty wild. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Now, let's talk about some more teams. Some more of our March Madness here on Very Cold Lasagna. And that is our 2021 NFL season recaps. So, in our part 4, we're going to be discussing the 6 teams that made it to the playoffs, got in as either below the 3 seed, below the 2 seeds. My pardon. Were either made it as a 3 seed or below. So they were either the part of the wild card round and didn't get past that. So we're going to be discussing the wild card losers, the losers of the AFC and NFC wild cards. So with that being said, let's get started with part 4 of our season recaps. So we're going to kick off part 4 of our 2021 NFL season recaps with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles in 2021 were heading into some uncertain territory. 2020, very, very bad year for Eagles and their fan base. They went 4-11-1 because, well, they had a very underwhelming roster, and, well, injuries to said roster also led to that 4-11-1 record. Also leading to that record was friction between Doug Peterson, the front office, and Carson Wentz going into a pretty bad regression period that led to the rookie and second rounder Jalen Hurts starting the rest of the way at, I think, is the late point of the season. And then there's that game in that season finale on, for whatever reason, NBC and the NFL decided that was the game to put on prime time. Yeah, that Sunday night final game of the season in week 17 against the Washington football team, where they've only put that there because, honestly, it was Washington pretty much putting the bow on the top on the NFC East. That was it. So they fired Doug Peterson after the season, and then in comes Colts offensive coordinator Nick Sirianni. And people are wondering, like, who's Nick Sirianni? Like, who is this guy? I personally didn't even know who Nick Sirianni was until, well, obviously, the 49ers game, like very early in the season. So in the offseason last year, they trade Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts for a third round pick and a conditional second round pick in the 2022 NFL draft that could become a first round pick. And, well, we'll get there eventually. And yeah, I'll just say it now, actually, that it actually did become a first round pick. So that pretty much all but assured that Jalen Hurts would be the starter in 2021. Obviously, still questions about whether or not he could be the guy to, take the Eagles to the top. So during that offseason, they released Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson, two key pieces in that offense and in Eagles pass. But they later drafted in Jalen Hurts' old teammate from Alabama, Devontae Smith. So you get a little bit of chemistry in the offense. So despite that, though, they didn't really do much in free agency. They did sign Ryan Kerrigan from the Washington football team. They got Steven Nelson, but mainly on short-term deals. So going to the season, you had a new head coach. You still had a pretty underwhelming roster still. You still had questions about a second-year quarterback that was getting a full season to start in the NFL. So 2021 was looking like the beginning of a rebuild for Philadelphia. But I don't think the Eagles remembered that. I honestly don't think the Eagles remembered that at all. So, for at least the most part of it, because, the Eagles went into Atlanta the first week of the season. They beat up on the Falcons, and easily so. Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith looked pretty damn good in that game. And the problem was, though, when it was only against the scraps. It was only week 1. Then when you go against the 49ers in week 2, you pretty much saw what was the case the rest of the way. They couldn't really outlast the real contenders. The problem was in the games against the real contenders, like the Tampa Bay Bucks, the Dallas Cowboys, the Kansas City Chiefs, there were things that would really question, like, why are they even trying to compete at this point? I mean, sure, you want to win games, but what was their goal for 2021? So anyway, Nick, during these games against the eventual playoff contenders, Nick Sirianni would make odd decisions that didn't need to be made. Like during that 49ers game, he made that failed Philly special on fourth down. They literally tried to go for it all very early in the game, and they failed. Why? And then very early, all throughout the season, Jalen Hurts struggled with finding his receivers that were well wide open, and in some games he would commit a bevy of turnovers. And then Jonathan Gannon's defense, the defensive coordinator, his defense got toasted early on, and sure, they got better down the line, but they were absolutely getting hammered by the best defenses given to them. So Nick Sirianni noticed that Jalen Hurts wasn't doing well so far. So he decided to change things up. He decided to change up the offense by making it more 49ers oriented, by making it, a run-based offense. So you had some pretty decent running backs in Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Jordan Howard, and then you had rookie Kenneth Gainwell. So they went to that style of offense, and they actually managed to have some success with it. But realistically, you could have picked one or two, Mr. Sirianni. So anyway, it was at that midway point of the season where that change happened, and most certainly it was a success for Philadelphia. And it was also during that time where the defense also tightened up. Darius Slay having the longest fumble recovery touchdown ever in that Denver game. The thing was, though, that heavy use of the running game, it would just create more questions about whether Jalen Hurts was the long-term option. I mean, he would still have those games where we'd have multiple turnovers, and it really wouldn't create a lot of passing situations or good throws. So there were also some games though that he looked pretty good, like for the games against the New Orleans Saints, or the first or the second game against Washington, and the second game against the New York Giants. So those games showed off what Jalen Hurts could potentially be if he corrects the simple things. So nonetheless, the Eagles took care of their business. They went 9-8, even though most of those wins were against hapless, rebuilding or injured teams like the New York Giants, Washington, the New Orleans Saints, the New York Jets, and and lo and behold, they surprisingly clinched a playoff spot. They actually clinched it before the 49ers. They had the worse record than them. So the Eagles managed to clinch their playoff spot, but unfortunately for them, pretty much their run first identity, the concerns about Jalen Hurts would come back to haunt them in the game against the Tampa Bay Bucks in the first round, because the Bucks would totally kick their ass. The Tampa shut down the running game. Miles Sanders couldn't find an open running lane. Neither could Jordan Howard or Boston Scott. And Jalen Hurts was getting pummeled by that pass rush, and he couldn't run the ball himself. The Bucks knew it was coming, and just like in previous other games, Jalen Hurts was missing open receivers, including to Devontae Smith. And of course, it wasn't until later in the game where they were just putting out the garbage numbers. So pretty bad end to the season for the Philadelphia Eagles. But even with the ass kicking into their 9-8 season, Eagles fans should feel a little bit encouraged for the future. Devontae Smith had a solid year. And Nick Sirianni, his running back approach should be a success. And it shouldn't be, though, it shouldn't be a long-term solution, because you still want to see what you have in Jalen Hurts. You still want to see if he's the guy, if he has the intangibles, if you should hopefully get a better offseason out of him. So also the defense got better in the second half. Fletcher Cox, Darius Slay, they were pretty damn good in that unit, and of course against the pretty bad teams, of course. So the Philadelphia Eagles still have some questions to answer this offseason, especially from Jalen Hurts, whether he's going to be the guy or not. But in order to answer those questions, you gotta build up the key positions. You gotta build up some gray areas first. So going into the offseason, they had about $21 million in cap space to spend, going into the free agency period before it opened up. Some of the key free agents included Derek Barnett and Ryan Kerrigan. You also had Rodney McLeod and Anthony Harris at safety. They also had Jordan Howard and corner Steven Nelson. I don't know if they're going to retain any of them, but some of the things that they already addressed included their big splash signing in Panthers edge rusher Hassan Reddick to a 3-year deal. The biggest thing that the Philadelphia Eagles lacked last year was pressuring quarterbacks, even with Fletcher Cox in the lineup. And I guess the Ryan Kerrigan signing didn't really help them much. But Hassan Reddick had a really good year for the Carolina Panthers. As I mentioned in my Panther season recap, Hassan Reddick will be a really good addition alongside Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat. That pass rush is going to be could be a really good unit to go along with. So there's still something to address. I know the Eagles didn't really do much yet to address their other team needs, but they can do so in the draft because they have 3 picks. Yes, 3 picks to go in this 2022 draft. They have 15th, 16th, and 19th. So 3 picks right out of the gate. So there's still some things to address for the Philadelphia Eagles. They have to upgrade the receiver spot behind Devontae Smith. As you saw in the wildcard game against the Tampa Bay Bucks, when Devontae Smith gets taken away, Jalen Hurts becomes a sitting duck. And no, Jalen Reagor is not the answer to the Philadelphia Eagles receiving problem. And neither is Quez Watkins. I mean, Quez Watkins can be a good, okay reserve guy, but as a wide receiver too, no, not at all. So they lack in both quality and they kind of need a veteran presence because they're kind of a pretty young roster. They kind of are. So it's in their best interest to not just grab obviously a young receiver in the draft to go alongside Devontae Smith, but maybe they should grab a veteran presence to mentor these receivers like a Julio Jones or Jarvis Landry or Cole Beasley. At the time, right now, they're in the open market. So perhaps the Eagles can invest in one of their draft picks to go get the best receiver available as a number 2 option behind Devontae Smith. They also have to get another edge rusher opposite Hassan Reddick unless either Brandon Graham and Josh Sweat are already on the opposite end. But either way, they have to solidify on the pass rush and solidify that run defense just to shore up that defensive line. Just also they have to solidify that secondary by re-signing some safeties. Rodney McLeod and what was his name? Anthony Harris. They can either re-sign them. I mean, they were okay, but if they have any leftover money, maybe go for a guy like Tyrann Mathieu or Kareem Jackson. So they still need production from their secondary to tighten up the defense and maybe get some plays. They haven't gotten too many big plays outside of Darius Slay. They have to get him some help. So the Eagles still have a ways to go if they want to make at least a deep push in the NFC East. They have to make some moves to at least compete with Dak Prescott in the Dallas Cowboys. So you still have some questions about Jalen Hurts and his viability as the long-term starter. But, 2021 did provide some hope for the Philadelphia Eagles and their fan base. So if they continue to build around Jalen Hurts, strengthen that defense with more quality signings, and, get Jalen a number 2 receiver behind Devontae Smith, then who knows? Maybe Philadelphia can possibly throw the rebuild right out the window in potentially a big hurry. So next up, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers. For the Steelers, they've had their run. They had their fun with Big Ben Roethlisberger for almost 20 years. Ben took them 3 Super Bowls, won 2 of them. They got them multiple division titles, and overall was a key to their success for the most part. However, with everything though, with time, Big Ben eventually, he eventually became the next victim of Father Time. His play, his production, it dipped over the years. And let's not remember the last 2 years with his season-ending elbow injury in 2019, and then his production seriously dipping in 2020 with the large amount of turnovers and his very, very bad throws throughout that year. So despite all that, the Steelers won the division, won the AFC North, but then they got destroyed at home. They were very fortunate that there were no fans at that time against the Cleveland Browns. But still, the Pittsburgh Steelers went to 2021 with some expectations of at least winning the AFC North again. And you still had Mike Tomlin as the head coach. Big Ben decided to come back for one last run, or perhaps one last paycheck, because he still had a large amount of salary in this contract. So Big Ben coming back for his 18th season, and who knew at the time it was going to be his last, despite the horrific wild card loss at home. But the problem was the Steelers wound up losing key players in free agency like Bud Dupree, Matt Filer, and the Steelers really didn't do much to address those losses. I mean, they did do some things in the draft, like getting Najee Harris at running back and a tight end called Pat Freiermuth, but they didn't really do really much of anything to address the losses at key positions. So going into the season, you were kind of like lacking in some areas, and you also didn't have much of a succession plan for Big Ben in the event that he did retire after the season at the time again. So it was going to be a pretty competitive division, and the Steelers were kind of the old guard. But for Pittsburgh, they still wanted to give Ben at least one last go at a potential playoff run. The problem was they were running into some issues all season long. Despite having the winning record by season's end, these problems were very persistent all season long. The offensive line was struggling all early and often. They struggled to keep a already aging Big Ben protected, and they were pretty much giving no room for Najee Harris to run. The thing was trying to keep Big Ben upright, because like as soon as the ball snapped, the pass protection would immediately break down for Ben Roethlisberger. And for sometimes Ben Roethlisberger would get so rattled by the pressure, he would either get sacked or he would erratically throw the ball away. That would lead to a turnover. So if it wasn't the offense, it was sometimes the defense too that would give up some big plays and in some instances a lot of points to other teams. So there's some inconsistency of the offense that cost Pittsburgh some valuable games and put them near elimination towards the midway point of the season. But after that point, the defense, especially TJ Watt and Mike Tomlin's coaching staff, they helped turn things around. They got enough key wins late in the season to get them into the playoffs. And they also got a little bit of luck too. Sure, the quality of opponents was far and few between, but when they had a pass rush, JJ Watt, Devin Bush, Cameron Hayward, that defense was they really helped them overcome the terribleness of the offense. That defense the pass rush got a lot of stops and gave them the offense the opportunities that, well, sometimes they gave away, but other times they took advantage of. Big Ben was, still meh, but he made more than enough passes in the mid-range to the receiving corps that was, in fact, missing Juju Smith-Schuster for half the season with injury, and Chase Claypool being a disappointment in year 2. Claypool was too busy, dancing around, taunting other players. Like, really big disappointment by Claypool in year 2. So Steelers took care of business against the mediocre teams, and again, they got some help in Week 18 thanks to the Colts and the Chargers to get into the playoffs. Now, the final 2 wins included Big Ben's last road and home wins against their division rivals, the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens. But of course, in the AFC wild card, the defense could only do so much to Patrick Mahomes. TJ Watt could only do so much. They managed to get a botched trick lateral play and fumble for a touchdown, but that was pretty much the ignition to the offense destroying them pretty much. So anyway, that they got completely destroyed in the wild card round in pretty much a repeat of their Week 16 matchup. So for the Steelers, they went 9-7-1. Yes, kind of a little disappointing end to what ended up being Big Ben's last ever game. Was it a nice feel-good run for the Pittsburgh Steelers for Big Ben? Yes, but I guess for me, it was just a bigger indication that it was just time for Ben Roethlisberger to ride into the sunset. So pretty much all it did was make Ben go out on a super whopper in that AFC wildcard game because, again, he got blown out in his last ever game. I mean, Was that really the memory that like most quarterbacks would want to go out on? Really? So nonetheless, the Steelers, I guess, they gave Big Ben one last dance in the postseason. And again, as he expected, he finally retired after the season ended. So after 18 years, the two-time Super Bowl champion finally retired. And in his prime, he was a very efficient passer. But the problem for the Steelers now is that they don't really have much of a succession plan in place. For whatever reason, general manager Kevin Colbert, throughout the years, had no interest in at least finding a pet project for Ben to mentor, get him up to speed, and get ready in time for when that time came for Big Ben to retire. Hey, we have our quarterback ready to go, but nope. They literally had to sign a quarterback off the streets, and did they ever? They got the former and first ever Nickelodeon MVP, and his name is Mitchell Mick Trubisky. Yes, they got the former MVP, the first ever MVP, Mitch Trubisky. But man, MVP Mitch has some big shoes to fill. And in what's going to be a wild AFC North that has Desean Watson, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson, just oof. So hopefully whatever he learned in Buffalo, backing up Josh Allen for a year, hopefully he learned that very well. So this is going to be a big offseason, probably already is so far, for the Pittsburgh Steelers, because not only do they have to fill the void for Ben still, which they already did with Mitch Trubisky, but we'll see. But they have to keep giving Trubisky some tools to success. So going to the offseason, they started with around $31 million in cap space. Some of their key free agents include Juju Smith-Schuster, who ended up going to the Kansas City Chiefs. They still have Joe Hayden on free agency. Ray McLeod ended up going to the San Francisco 49ers. Taco Charlton, the edge rusher, and right guard Tri Turner. I don't know how to pronounce it. So some of their needs that they already addressed so far, some of their key offseason moves was that they obviously signed Mitch Trubisky, and then they re-signed one key piece to the Steelers defense, and that was corner Ahkello Witherspoon. For a team that was released by the Seahawks a year ago and also let go in free agency by the 49ers, Witherspoon really did solid in his first year in Pittsburgh. And they also signed Bills corner Levi Wallace to kind of solidify that Bills secondary. They also revamped the offensive line a little by signing Bears guard James Daniel and Viking center Mason Cole, so giving Mitch Trubisky a little bit of protection. And they gave the defense a little bit of boost as well. Give TJ Watt some help. TJ Watt some help with Jaguars linebacker Miles Jack. Yes, that same Miles Jack that was giving the L's. That was giving Pittsburgh the L's in that divisional game a couple years ago. So some of the things that they still need to address throughout the offseason is a wide receiver. They have to get the best wide receiver, whether it's in the draft or whatever's in the bargain bin, because, well, they have Chase Claypool, but they don't really have anyone else at that other opposite wide receiver end. They already lost Juju Smith-Schuster. They haven't really had a top receiver option since, well, I hate to say it, Antonio Brown. So they have to get the best available receiver. I'd say their best option is in the draft at number 20. Don't know who that is, but whoever's available, get him. They also have to continue to build that offensive line around Mitch Trubisky, give him the best protection, because the offensive line, again, last year for Pittsburgh was one of the worst. It really was one of the worst. So the defense is already tightened up. Now the offense should be the main priority as you go into a new era for Steelers football. So it was a nice 18 years for the Pittsburgh Steelers with Big Ben Roethlisberger, although not so nice decade considering Big Ben's decline in play and then the debacles with Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. But they at least gave him one last gift in a playoff game, I guess, albeit a blowout loss. But now they face the deadly future. Now they face what could be an uncertain future. Sure, they got the MVP, Mitch Trubisky, but the Steelers better hope that that MVP and whatever he learned in Buffalo can at least help them survive a wasteland of what is going to be the AFC North. So next up, we have the Death Star, or actually the former Death Star of the NFL, and that is the New England Patriots. For the better part of 20 years, nearly 20 years actually, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick had their reign of terror, their Death Star over the NFL and the AFC, winning 6 Super Bowl titles together, winning the AFC countless times. Yes, that weak-ass AFC at the time. But once Tom Brady finally decided to take his talents to Tampa Bay, it was, well, not much of a surprise that the Patriots suffered a drop-off in 2020, going 7-9 with Cam Newton under center and surrendering the AFC East to the rising Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. So Bill Belichick, the GM, decided to go on a spending spree last year, netting the likes of Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry, Sean Aguilar to bolster the offense. And defensively, they acquired Matthew Judon, Jalen Mills, and Kyle Van Noy, which, by the way, is a returning Patriots player. But, of course, the big offseason move for New England was what they did in the draft. At number 15, literally waiting in the wings, was their quarterback of the future, Alabama's Mac Jones. Obviously, going in to the draft, everyone thought it was going to be Mac Jones going to the 49ers. But, well, we knew what happened there. Trey Lance went to the 49ers, and then Justin Fields went to the Bears. And then literally Bill Belichick didn't have to do anything. It was like literally the Luigi wins by doing absolutely nothing meme for Bill Belichick, because he didn't have to do jack shit. He didn't have to trade up to get Mac Jones. He didn't have to do anything. He literally got him at number 15, just where he predicted. Just kidding. So he actually did get some solid pieces that would turn into key contributors in Christian Barmore, defensive tackle, and running back Ramondre Stevenson. So Mac Jones did end up winning the starting job over Cam Newton in the preseason, and Newton was released before the season started. But, you know, Mac Jones, I think I mentioned this in my Filthy Casual scouting last year. I mentioned that I like Mac Jones as a Tom Brady like clone with his passing and his decision making. But the problem was, well, in the modern NFL, where everyone's running out of the pocket, everyone's mobile. Yeah, being a pocket passer may not help you out in the long term. But, well, either way, still questions about how Mac Jones would do in real-time action. But either way, it was the beginning of a new era for Patriots football. But it was kind of rough in the early portions. The Patriots went 1-3, enduring some growing pains on offense, and that included some rookie growing pains for Mac Jones. That included some badly timed turnovers that would cost them games against the Dolphins in the opener and the New Orleans Saints 2 games later. So, also during this period, while not much of a highlight, because they lost that game, they did get to witness the return of an old favorite. Their old, I guess you could call husband, Tom Brady. Yeah, Tom Brady came back in the prime time, the big game of the regular season. Yes, Bill Belichick versus Tom Brady, the Tampa Bay Bucks versus the New England Patriots in Week 4. So Tom Brady didn't have really much of an electric game, but he still managed to return home and face his old team. You know, got some cheers before the game, and then obviously during the game got jeered. I mean, in tradition, but the Bucks managed to get the win over Brady's old team. So by midseason, the Patriots were 2-4, but after that point, they turned their fortunes around. The defense played much better, especially from the likes of corner J.C. Jackson, the tackle Christian Barmore, safety Adrian Phillips, Kyle Duggar, and linebacker Matthew Judon. The defense intensified in generating turnovers, pressuring the quarterback. Again, that secondary was very good in coverage and limited the amount of passing plays that were made. The pass rush did very good at netting some timely sacks to get them off the field on third downs. And on offense, you know, Mac Jones looked solid at times with his throws and pocket awareness. But again, there were still some times where it reminded everyone that, he's still a rookie. He's still a rookie learning. As such, Josh McDaniels used the solid running game of Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson and Brandon Bolden to take some of that load off of him. Now, again, during the stretch, most of the teams that they beat were pretty much scrubs, like the Panthers, the Browns, the Titans. Yes, even the Titans were scrubs, and the Falcons. And by the way, they shut out the Falcons, so it's no surprise that they kicked their ass. So the problem was, though, like, despite beating these teams, the offense would have one too many slow starts because of what Josh McDaniels was doing to protect Mac Jones. So sure, the Patriots during this stretch before their bye week would end up being the Buffalo Bills, albeit in terrible win conditions. And then they ended up taking command of the AFC East during their bye week when the Bills lost to the Bucs a couple days later. So, Patriots fans were thinking, oh, we're back in the AFC East. We're going to take over the division now, pal. So the Patriots seemed like they were back. Yes, because, well, they were playing better football. The Bills were on a downward trend because of inconsistent offensive play, and they lost a key piece of their defense in Tre'Davious White. But their own problems would begin because they would lose to the Colts in a key matchup when they came back on a Saturday night. They lost to the Bills at home in the Bills' revenge game, and they lost a season finale to the Miami Dolphins when the Dolphins were already eliminated, and that game would end up costing them the AFC East. Well, actually, it was the Bills game that would cost them the AFC East, but still, the Patriots ended up having to play their wild card game in Buffalo against the Bills, and, well, yeah, we all know what happened there. It was a total ass kicking by Buffalo in all phases in that first round game. The defense for the Patriots allowed Josh Allen and the offense to score on every single possession of that game. Yes, that entire a team that's led by a defensive coach and Bill Belichick did absolutely nothing, absolutely nothing to prepare for that game, and they literally let Josh Allen steamroll that team, steamroll them. It's like Mac Jones and Kendrick Bourne were the only ones that were able to show up. I mean, sure, 14 garbage time points, but sure, they still managed to make some good throws in that game, but they were just thoroughly dominated in that game. Probably one of the most lopsided playoff games I've ever seen. So yes, completely down way to end the season for New England, but I guess you could say you could be a little bit encouraged by the flashes Mac Jones offered this year. Sure, some things to work on, but he clearly was the best quarterback in this draft class by a mile, with his intelligence, his throwing ability, and you did see him run. So don't like he proved me wrong. He proved me damn wrong. He can freaking run, so he can get out of the damn pocket. Okay, so. I also got some steals in the draft with Christian Barmore and Ramondre Stevenson, both of whom showed valuable production for the Patriots. So overall, a solid season for New England and Bill Belichick, and you just have to hope that Mac Jones gets even better in year 2. But to do that, you got to get him some help. So going to the offseason, you didn't really have honestly much money to spend. You only had around $8 million going into the offseason. Going out of it, after the first week of free agency, you have around $10 million right now as we speak. Some of your key free agents include safety Devin McCourty, right tackle Trent Brown, linebacker Dante Hightower, and linebacker Kyle Van Noy. Some of their key offseason moves was, well, they lost their offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels to the Las Vegas Raiders because he accepted their head coaching position. So it remains to be seen how Josh McDaniels would do in Vegas in his second ever head coaching stint, his first ever one since 2009. So either way, let's see how he does in his second chance. And perhaps their biggest loss was, besides McDaniels, was J.C. Jackson. Yes, they lost their corner J.C. Jackson to the LA Chargers. It's going to be a big boost to that LA defense, but perhaps a big loss for that secondary for the Patriots. So honestly, other than that, the Patriots, in contrast to last year, they didn't make a big splash this year. At least not right now, at least. So perhaps they're focusing on the draft, and it's probably because they don't have much money to spend, and probably because they wasted it all last year. So some of the things that they need to address going forward before the start of the season is they have to upgrade at wide receivers. Yes, they invested heavily at wide receiver last year, but yeah, their signings proved to be mostly total bust. Every addition that they added besides Kendrick Bourne was a flop. Yes, and the options are running thin for Bill Belichick. Sure, there's still a few cheap options that they could bring in the free agent market, but what they need is a downfield threat in the draft. They need someone to stretch the field, get Mac Jones to strike on his deep throws, but they need that downfield threat for Mac Jones to stretch the field and, you know, give him some options on what kind of passes he should throw. They should also draft a corner or two to replace the loss of J.C. Jackson. And sure, the Patriots might not be able to find one in round one or round two, but there's still some solid options. And the free agent market still kind of flooded with some corners still holding out hope for a big contract. So for the Patriots, you know, they saw some hope for optimism in year one with Mac Jones. The thing is, though, they still got to give him some help. If they give him a number one receiver in the draft, mainly a downfield threat, they build that defense back up, especially considering they lost J.C. Jackson, and you don't know if like their key free agents like Dante Hightower and Van Noy are going to come back and play another year. Then New England might be able to compete again for a playoff spot in the AFC, because yeah, again, this AFC is going to be an onslaught. Year two could be better for Mac Jones, and who knows? If the Patriots can make these moves, who knows? The AFC could face some mac and cheese in 2022. So at this halfway point of our part 4 of our season recaps, let me know if you're a fan of these teams, how they did in 2021, and what are you looking forward to them doing in 2022. So now, that being said, let's begin our second half of our part 4, and let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. Oh man, what a season they had. But going into their 2021 is honestly, in my opinion, pretty uneventful for the Raiders last year. And that's just my opinion. Probably I was paying too much of what was going on in their offseason. But nonetheless, you know, for 2020, for them, they got off to a hot start in the first half. But just like in 2019, they completely cool off. They blew away games that they needed to win to finally get back in the playoffs, and they just couldn't finish it. So they go 8-8. They kept John Gruden for another year, and it was during the last offseason they tried to make attempts to upgrade that defense that had been pretty horrific in the last couple of seasons. They added the likes of defensive end Yannick Ngakoue, Quinn Jefferson, and corner Casey Hayward. So they shored up that defense. They also shored up an offensive line that been kind of bad, but they also reached for a right tackle. They also, you know, they reached for a little bit, you know, a guy that's been kind of in college. They went for a right tackle in Alex Leatherwood, again, who's been in college. So, you know, going into the season, you know, you have John Gruden, head coach, who hasn't been living up to his hefty 10-year contract, and Derek Carr has been okay. He's been okay as their quarterback. So not many expectations were in store for them. In an especially competitive AFC West that had Patrick Mahomes, obviously, and then Justin Herbert was going to be in his year 2. So who knows? Maybe the Raiders were just going to be third place father or even bottom of the basement in 2021. But, you know, in their first early weeks of the season, no, it wasn't. They got to a surprising 3-0 start, netting upsets over the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers in consecutive weeks. So unlike other teams, other 3-0 teams, this was no fluke. This didn't seem like no fluke for the Vegas Raiders. They actually netted quality wins over last season's playoff teams. The problem was, though, unfortunately for them, that infamous saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, went into full overdrive. Yes, a series of events in the preceding weeks kicked into overdrive. You had head coach John Gruden. There were massive amounts of emails leaked that came from the investigation regarding Dan Snyder, and those emails consisted of racist, derogatory statements to certain players and key people around the NFL that were made by John Gruden, and that gave a bad look onto him in the Raiders organization. And after a loss to the Chicago Bears in Week 5, he stepped down, he resigned, and that led to Rich Bisaccia entering in as the interim head coach. So it was also during the bye week. A couple of weeks later, sure, the Raiders won 2 more games after John Gruden left, but it's also during the bye week after that second-year receiver Henry Ruggs was arrested for DUI that ended up killing a woman and her dog late at night. And then second-year corner Damon Arnett showed his guns, his firearms, on Instagram Live and made death threats about it. So both of them ended up getting released. Henry Ruggs in serious trouble. So it took up a big toll, both physically and mentally, on the Vegas Raiders. In the mid-season point, the cards were beginning to fall, and Vegas was beginning to burn on the Raiders. So they would endure a very bad 1-5 stretch that included 2 40-point ass kickings from the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, 40-point ass kickings twice, at home, on primetime television, and on the road in Kansas City. So not a good look. And let's remember the fact that that 40-point ass kicking in Kansas City was because the Raiders stupidly danced on Kansas City's logo. Don't do that. Don't piss them off. So either way, this loss of Henry Ruggs, I mean, sure, he did a stupid thing, but it really impacted the flow of the Raiders offense. Derek Carr no longer had a downfield option, no threat. And not even the late season signing of Desean Jackson, who got released by the Rams, he wasn't able to fix that problem. The defense ended up giving a shit ton of points during this period. They gave way too many big plays that were already out of reach by the time the play was about to proceed. So they were 6-7 in December, after getting embarrassed again by Kansas City. So the Raiders looked broken physically and emotionally after all the drama they were enduring. And by that point, like, people were thinking, should they give up the season? Should they tank? Should they just let it ride, go for a high draft pick? But instead, Rich Bisaccia motivated them. They motivated them to get better. They were still in playoff positioning. It's like, hey, let's go take it. Let's go take that spot that they were still alive for. I mean, they took it to heart, and sure, it wasn't the prettiest of football, but they managed to finish the season winning their last 4 games to net a playoff berth. And that last game of the season against the LA Chargers, it got them into the playoffs. And during this stretch, both sides made critical plays, especially from Derek Carr and breakout slot receiver Hunter Renfrow on the offensive end, Max Crosby and Yannick Ngakoue lighting up that pass rush. And of course, like I said, to get that playoff berth, they had to face the Chargers at home in the final game of the regular season. And they were literally they were in overtime. They were literally milking the clock. All they had to do was milk that clock and tie the game. And it could have sent the Chargers to the playoffs as well. They were literally doing LA a favor. But then Brandon Staley calls a timeout, and then it changes the game plan for Las Vegas, and they only get into the playoffs instead of the Clippers. So the Raiders win in the season finale, and they go to Cincinnati, and it was predicted that Cincinnati was going to kick their ass, but no, the Raiders actually managed to stay alive in that game. And sure, they didn't win it in the end because they didn't make enough plays. And Derek Carr got intercepted near the end zone. But everyone from top to bottom on this Raider squad fought their hearts out. They really fought their hearts out. And they have Rich Bisaccia to thank for that. They managed to fight off all this drama, all this emotional heartbreak, just to get into the postseason. Derek Carr did pretty damn good in the season, despite his usual oddball turnovers, his lack of options, and he also didn't even have Darren Waller for a good chunk of the season with injuries, and kind of disappointing for Darren Waller. Derek Carr also had a bad offensive line. The defense did much better than years past, and the signings of Ngakoue and Casey Hayward paid big dividends. Like I said, with Hunter Renfrow, big breakout year for him. He stepped up big when there was literally no options for Derek Carr to go to. But most importantly, interim head coach Rich Bisaccia really lifted the team up when literally the entire Raiders organization was kind of in a black hole to finish out the season strong. Now, some of his coaching decisions were kind of during games, but his personality, his people skills, he was really needed. The players liked him, and what he did was far and beyond to keep his team afloat. Now, it was kind of sucked that it wasn't enough for Mark Davis to keep him around as the permanent head coach, but hopefully it helps the Raiders and Mark Davis to learn that lesson. Play your hearts out, be a people person, and all that. Now, going to the offseason, they already found their next head coach in Josh McDaniels, as well as their new general manager, because they fired Mike Mayock, Dave Ziegler. So they were in a big position. Those two were in a big position and still are in a big position to continue the success, turn this luck around, turn that playoff spot, turn that playoff game that they're in into even more. And oh boy, did they. So going into the offseason, they had around $20 million to spend initially. Some of their key free agents included Marcus Mariota, Quinn Jefferson, and Jonathan Hackins, Carl Nassib, KJ Wright, Deshaun Jackson, Richie Incognito. Those are at least some of the key free agents. There are other key free agents like Casey Hayward, Zay Jones, Chandler Jones. No, not Chandler Jones. He signed, by the way. But there are other key free agents like Casey Hayward, Zay Jones. They're already gone. But going back to Chandler Jones, he signed with the Las Vegas Raiders. So big addition to the Vegas pass rush, which, by the way, gained a key extension with Max Crosby. So 4 more years with Mr. Crosby, and he gets a running mate with Chandler Jones. So big addition to their pass rush. But the biggest move that they made in Vegas with rolling the dice and getting that wild card was the trade for Davante Adams from the Green Bay Packers. Holy shit. Yeah. Yes, they traded 2 first-round picks for this year. Yes, it literally didn't cost them much aside from the contract extension, the big hefty contract extension. Yes, it only cost the Raiders this year's first and second round picks and a massive contract for Davante Adams. Holy shit. So Derek Carr gets his old teammate from Fresno back on the team, not back on the team, but reunited. This is big. This is really big. I mean, yes, Derek Carr is kind of a downgrade from Aaron Rodgers, kind of, but the two, obviously, teammates in college. So hopefully this worked out. Hopefully this works out for them and gives the Raiders a massive boost in the offense. So teams won't always be targeting Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. It gives Derek Carr more options to play with in this team and gives what the Raiders absolutely needed in the offseason, a downfield threat to attack, to stretch the field, attack the defense, and they got it in Davante Adams. So big need that they already addressed so far this offseason. So some of the things that they still need to address is their defense. They lost Casey Hayward in free agency, so they need to go back out and get a corner. they should also consider getting a safety as well. So they added some cheap pieces, but mostly reserves in Darius Phillips and Anthony Averett. But they need a starting corner to help out the young secondary. But there's still some pieces available. You know, you got Stephon Gilmore and Patrick Peterson still available on the free agent market at the time. And, you know, there's still a good safety market out there. Tyrann Mathieu, anyone? You know, they could also add some depth to the offensive line. You know, not sure how a third round pick will look in terms of finding a gem, but you still have to solidify Derek Carr and, well, an offensive line that was pretty bad last year. So for the Raiders, you know, they were in a very tough predicament in 2021. You had the John Gruden email fiasco, Henry Ruggs getting arrested. The team looked like it was going to hit big time rock bottom. But then Rich Bisaccia lit a fire in them and made a late season playoff push. And yes, while it didn't end the way that they wanted to, and it didn't go further, and Rich Bisaccia didn't get a permanent gig, the Raiders, you know, they could still continue to build on what Bisaccia did late in the season. And hopefully McDaniels continues to light a fire in them. Like, of course, in a positive way, in a people person way, in 2022 and beyond. So now that they got Josh McDaniels, now that they got Dave Ziegler, now that they got them taking big swings at guys like Chandler Jones and especially Devontae Adams, now it's on the roster. Now it's on guys like Derek Carr and the Raiders offense and pretty much the entire team overall to play the right cards, roll the dice, and just overall execute for them to survive an all-out brawl in the AFC West in 2022. So next up, we're going to talk about the Arizona Cardinals. The second year under Cliff Kingsbury was pretty disastrous. You know, they win the first half of their games, and people were thinking, oh, they're finally going to make their first playoff appearance in almost forever. But then they go on to lose the other half of their games in 2020 to go 8-8 and forfeit the last NFC playoff spot to the Chicago Bears. And, you know, during that stretch in 2020, the biggest problems the Cardinals faced was Cliff Kingsbury, their head coach, his inability to adapt to in-game situations, especially when it came to changing up his play calls when the team was trailing and losing. So, also, Kyle Murray also eventually got figured out late in the season. You know, considering how he's a mobile quarterback and he likes to run around the pocket a lot. Yeah, all the defenses had to do was collapse the pocket, contain him really quick, and limit his chances to get the ball out. So, Cardinals pretty much got figured out late in the season, and they didn't really adapt to what the defense were doing. So, during the offseason, the Cardinals, they couldn't really do much, and they didn't do much because of the limited money they had to spend. And they also lost some of the key contributors, like Patrick Peterson and Hassan Reddick on defense. And they also lost their longtime receiver in Larry Fitzgerald. They also added the likes, though, to counter some of those losses with AJ Green, JJ Watt, and James Conner. They also added a center in Rodney Hudson. So, you know, they lost some people, but they also gained some people. The thing was, though, they didn't really have much depth. They didn't really have much reserves or like backups just in case something happened to the starters. So for Arizona, expectations were kind of middling at best because of not just the lack of depth at certain positions, but considering last season's disastrous end, yeah, that's why expectations were kind of middling. But, you know, it was still a wide open NFC West, pretty competitive. So they were hopeful to seize the opportunity. And, you know, surprisingly, they did so early on because they got off to a 7-0 start. And this wasn't a fluky undefeated streak like other teams had to start the season. The Cardinals actually ended up beating teams that eventually made the playoffs, you know, and they did so from the very beginning. You know, the offense playing at a high level, especially from Kyler Murray, looking like an early MVP frontrunner. The receiving core of AJ Green, DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, and then their rookie, Rondale Moore, looked like a deadly foursome. It was like they were good route runners, like made some pretty nice catches, and they were pretty hard to stop after the catch. So the defense was able to contain the opposing quarterbacks, get some big stops on third down as well as fourth down situations. So all in all, the Cardinals looked like they were going to be in full gear to not just get back into the postseason, but perhaps make a deep playoff run and be perhaps an X Factor Super Bowl contender. But hold the brakes. Hold the damn brakes. Nah. Guess who said, nope, not today, Maggle. Not today, Michael. The Green Bay Packers in week 8 were like, nope, we're shutting this gig down, partner. On a Thursday night, the Green Bay Packers went to Arizona and pretty much lit up the gas brakes. They made the Cardinals lose their first games. The offense was pretty much a no-show for most of the game. And yeah, AJ Green sold that game away by not looking at Kyler Murray, who threw the ball towards him, and Rasul Douglas easily picked that thing off. And the Cardinals lost that game and lost their first game of the season. Now, sure, they bounced back from that game with a 2-1 stretch. But the thing is, during that stretch, you see the cracks begin to form. During that Packers game, Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins got injured with ankle and hamstring injuries, respectively. J.J. Watt was already lost for the regular season with a shoulder injury and had to get surgery. And then you had guys like Chase Edmonds and Rodney Hudson miss games with injuries that I don't remember. Now, surely, their backups managed to beat a more healthier 49ers team and a somewhat healthy Seahawks team. But, it was apparent that the lack of depth and full health would eventually damage the team down the stretch. And that stretch indeed did damage the Cardinals yet again. So even with Murray and Hopkins back in the lineup, the Cardinals went on another choke job. Murray was again contained in the pocket by opposing defenses and, was sacked even more than last season's collapse. The defense let up more big plays and wasn't able to get as much pressure as during their undefeated start. And once again, Cliff Kingsbury, during games, failed to adjust his game plan when his team was trailing. And I think in a few games, he let up leads in games. So the Cardinals eventually lost their grip on the NFC West to the LA Rams, and deservedly so when they lost to the Detroit Lions of all teams. So they clinched their playoff spot. They got some help from the Rams, ironically, by the Rams being the Minnesota Vikings late in the season. And of course the Rams, during that wild card game to close out Super Wild Card Weekend, whooped their candy asses in that game. So overall, this season collapse was perhaps even worse for Arizona because, they get off to this surprising 7-0 start. They looked like an X Factor Super Bowl contender. They looked unstoppable with that offense that had all these weapons with Christian Kirk, Rondale Moore, DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, and then you had a running back in James Conner that was resurging. But then they lost their first game, and then they got all the injuries, and then eventually in December they got their people healthy. They completely took off their gas pedal yet again, and look what happened when they got to the playoffs in that Monday night playoff game. They got embarrassed, really embarrassed. Now I was surprised that the front office didn't fire Cliff Kingsbury for this even worse choke job. Now, what's going to happen if he does it yet again for the third season in a row in 2022? So, going into this offseason, they have a lot of questions to ask themselves. What's the secondary going to be like? What are the options behind DeAndre Hopkins and Rondale Moore? Why does Cliff Kingsbury still have a job? When you think about it, the Cardinals had a lot of short-term deals and not of long-term options at certain skill positions, and a lot of it may have had to do with the tight money they had. But either way, not good for the Arizona Cardinals in what could be a still tight NFC West. So going into this free agency period, they were in the red. They had they had minus 800,000, so not that bad of red, but still they were still in the red to open up free agency. So some of the key free agents include AJ Green, Chandler Jones, who they lost, Chase Edmonds, who they also lost, and Christian Kirk, who they also lost. So they pretty much lost most of their key free agents, but they did manage to get back Zach Ertz and James Conner. So at least have some pieces back in the offense, but you have to go back and try to address the big losses that you had in the offseason. So right now you still have about $7 million to spend after restructuring some contracts, releasing some players. You're slated to draft at number 23. So some things you still have to do is get younger at the receiver position. So right now as it stands, sure, DeAndre Hopkins is your number one receiver, but after he didn't really have much of a healthy season in 2021, like who knows if he'll have a fully healthy one in 2022. So the Cardinals should invest in at least a second or third receiver option until Rondale Moore takes a leap into that second top receiver role. They have to look into at least maybe a day 1 or day 2 pick in the draft to find a solid option for Kyler Murray to throw to, because the Cardinals did lose a key piece in Christian Kirk, who got overpaid by the Jaguars, by the way. And they also have to find the best available edge rusher in the draft. I imagine they probably do this in round 1, because they lost the heart and soul of the pass rush in Chandler Jones. And JJ Watt's not getting older, and their linebacker pick from 2021 in Zaven Collins, he was kind of a disappointment in his rookie year. So that first pick should be focused on getting the right guy who's a good edge rusher. I mean, sure, like it's gonna be hard to replicate what Chandler Jones did for that pass rush, but you got to get some success somewhere. So you also have to get some help in the secondary. There was not a lot of depth in that area. So, and as a result, they got burned late in the season. They still have some options in the free agent market. And if they don't find anything, there's still some solid day 2, and perhaps maybe even a little bit of some steals in day 3 of the draft. So the Cardinals, they had a chance to make a deep run in the NFC. But again, just like in 2020, complacency from Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray wasted what could have been yet another promising season. And considering what they're doing right now in the offseason, and who knows what 2022 could look like. It could be another successful start that leads to another choke job, or they could be sitting with Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks in the basement of the NFC West. But either way, this past season for the Arizona Cardinals was yet another choke job for Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, and that is a massive fail. Our last team on our recaps for this episode is the Dallas Cowboys. How about them Cowboys? For the Dallas Cowboys, it has been a kind of a bad 2 years for Dallas. 2019 saw them drown in more mediocrity behind Jason Garrett as head coach. So I guess then was the time to finally fire his mediocre ass 9 years too late. So in came in Mike McCarthy in 2020 during the pandemic riddled NFL season. And 2020 did have some promise for Dallas. That was for like 5 weeks though, because Dak Prescott went down with the horrific leg injury. And then the rest of the way they went 5-11. Yeah, pretty bad. So the Cowboys made some solid offseason moves. They signed Dak Prescott to a long-term extension. They signed some short-term deals with the likes of Carlos Watkins, Malik Hooker, Keanu Neal, mainly on the defensive end. And they continued to go defense with the drafting a linebacker, Micah Parsons, with the number 11th overall pick. So there's still questions that remained on how Dak Prescott would look in his first game back after a very gruesome leg injury. But still, expectations were high for Dallas to bounce back after that horrific year and retake what was going to be a very winnable NFC East, despite, Washington winning that very horrid division in 2020. And, in that first game against Tampa Bay, Dak Prescott looked good. And sure, they lost a very close opener to the Bucs, but, early promising signs for the Cowboys. That's all they should care about. How is Dak going to look? And he looked pretty good, as if he never got injured. So, and you saw this in their 6-game winning streak. Dak Prescott playing at a very good level, moving around, slinging the ball around to the likes of Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb, and Dalton Schultz. He's pretty much back to his pre-injury form. The Cowboys rattled off 6 straight wins. Most of them beat the likes of eventual non-playoff teams, but they did rattle off a big win against the New England Patriots before the bye. That duo of CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup elevated the offense a lot. I mean, sure, Amari Cooper was your number one option, but for whatever reason, had a really down year. And then on the defensive end, Michael Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, a force to be reckoned with in the defense with netting tackles, getting a lot of big stops on defense, and for Trayvon Diggs, getting some pass deflections whenever he was not getting burned in coverage. Yes, that was the big problem with Diggs this past season, getting burned. Yes, indeed, despite all the big plays that he made. The problem was for the Cowboys, though, after the bye, they entered a mid-season stretch that saw Dak and the offense struggle against better defenses, and sometimes even less better defenses, and that caused them to lose valuable ground to on a top 2 seed in the NFC. And this was despite the defense playing at a high level, but the problem was Dak Prescott hitting a slump of inconsistency that honestly he never seemed to recover from, even when they got to December, when they played the entirety of the NFC East. So nonetheless, the Cowboys would still go 12-5, win the division because, well, it pays to be in the NFC East. But I guess they forgot about the playoff game against the San Francisco 49ers because, well, yeah, that San Francisco defense hammered that offensive line and harassed Dak all game long, with aside from 2 touchdowns and the fourth quarter comeback attempt. So yeah, they pretty much shit the bed in that playoff game. They couldn't generate any pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo besides an interception, and Mike McCarthy perhaps made one of the stupidest play calls in a playoff game. He on the last play of the game, when the Cowboys needed to get into field goal range, he decided to call a quarterback run instead of, let's have either Amari Cooper or CeeDee Lamb. Let's have Dak Prescott throw it to the sideline, or throw it close to the sideline so they can get out of bounds, get into field goal range. And I think they needed it to tie the game to force overtime. But nope. Let's have Dak Prescott run down the middle and then slide. Let's have him slide in the middle with no timeouts remaining and less than 10 seconds left. And then have everyone run down the field. And oops, my own lineman bumps into me. And instead of giving the ball to the ref, let's have me give the ball to my center and spike the ball, which I cannot do. What a stupid decision by Mike McCarthy. So the Cowboys lose on that stupidity. And even before then, they were already losing that game. So for the Cowboys, despite all of that, this was literally their best chance. This was literally their best chance to go on a Super Bowl run. Literally, Dak Prescott playing at a very, very good level, and the supporting cast really shined. Ezekiel Elliott, although he didn't have the best year, he actually had a pretty down year, but thankfully for Dallas, reserve Tony Pollard stepped his game up to serve as an energy boost for him and that running game. The offensive line, one of the best in the league in pass protection and run blocking, creating some open lanes for Elliott and Tony Pollard. And a lot of defensive playmakers, aside from DeMarcus Lawrence and Randy Gregory, as usual, especially Micah Parsons. I'm not sure if it's him or TJ Watt that won Defensive Player of the Year, but Micah Parsons really was the defense this year with his multi-threat ability as a linebacker and as a pass rusher, excellent in coverage, generating negative plays, and got some immediate stops and got to the quarterback really, really good. So the problem was for the Cowboys is that they weren't consistent. They just weren't consistent for much of the season, especially in December, where they would have a good game against Washington, but then they would have a shitty game against Arizona. They get off to a fast start against Washington, and then they would start slow in Arizona and never recover. So yeah, it's just bad offense, bad execution, bad coaching. It would lead to the Dallas Cowboys wasting their best chance. This was literally their chance. They had a literally talented roster, at least on paper. They had the talent to get to the Super Bowl. They executed everything. Had they execute everything properly, but they were just too inconsistent. They just didn't do enough. They just didn't. So what do you do from here? What do you do from here? This was literally their best chance, and they completely screwed the pooch on it. So going to the offseason, they had to make some difficult decisions because they were well over the cap going into free agency. Their initial cap space was around minus 21 million. So some difficult decisions to make, some contracts to restructure. But some of their key free agents going into free agency included left guard Connor Williams, right tackle La'el Collins, Greg Zuerlein, Carlos Watkins, Michael Gallup, and Cedric Wilson. Now they did lose Randy Gregory to the Denver Broncos. He initially agreed to come back to the Cowboys, but he's like, nope, I changed my mind. I'm going to Denver. I want to play for Russell Wilson. Yeah, he literally pulled a switcheroo on Dallas. They also re-signed, I think, did they already sign DeMarcus Lawrence, or they just extend him again? I don't know. But anyway, they also re-signed Michael Gallup to a big contract despite, an AC coming off that ACL injury. But they did lose Cedric Wilson, a key reserve piece, to the Miami Dolphins, and they also traded Amari Cooper to the Cleveland Browns. The skid marks fleeced the Dallas Cowboys for pennies on a dollar. They only got the Cowboys only got 5th and 6th round picks out of them. Out of the skid marks. What the hell? What the hell? They also lost right tackle La'el Collins to the not to the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Cowboys lose while the Bengals are retooling their offensive line to protect Joe Burrow. The Cowboys are losing their offensive line to unprotect Dak Prescott. So although they have a reverse cap space, 24 million in the green, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to retool that offensive line now? Because, well, they should. They need to, because they wound up losing a good chunk of the starters due to either cap casualties or free agency. So that's what Jerry Jones needs to do to ensure Dak can continue to elevate his play and not be a Joe Burrow in 2022. I mean, you can use the free agency money. You can use the 24th pick in the draft. Do something. They also have to find replacements for Cedric Wilson and Amari Cooper because, well, CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, they're not there yet. They are not there yet in wide receiver 1 and 2 production just yet. I mean, sure, CeeDee Lamb, pretty good receiver, but not wide receiver 1 just yet. So, again, risky proposition to give a big contract to Michael Gallup, who is coming off an ACL tear. I think he's a late season ACL tear too. So who knows if he's going to be ready by the start of the season. So the Dallas Cowboys need to find another wide receiver or two in the draft or bargain bin to add some depth at the receiver position. So the Cowboys got what they hoped for in Dak being healthy, having a bounce back year from the terrible leg injury in 2020. But, they blew their best chance. They literally blew their best chance to make a deep playoff run and even go to the Super Bowl. They literally had a talented roster, a stacked roster to go to the Super Bowl. A very good defense and a very good offense. But stagnant coaching and bad execution on all sides led to some bad losses late into the season and to some inconsistency and an early playoff exit to Jimmy Garoppolo. Yes, to Jimmy Garbage Fail and the 49ers. How do you do that? So sure, they can try again in 2022, but with how much they lost in free agency, they may have just blew their best chance yet at going for a Super Bowl in the years to come. So that is it for part 4 of my NFL season recaps 2021. And how do you think your team did in 2021? Whether you're a fan of the Cowboys, the Cardinals, the Philadelphia Eagles, the who else did we talk about? The Pittsburgh Steelers and the New England Patriots. How do you think they did in 2021? And how do you think they will do in 2022, considering the moves they made currently in free agency? And what do you think that they'll do throughout the offseason? Let me know. And if you missed any of the team recaps, they're all on YouTube and all the other platforms as well. So anyway, we're going to continue to go through the final 7. Yes, the final 7 teams on our team recaps. Next episode, we're going to go through the 4 divisional round losers, the Buffalo Bills, the Green Bay Packers, the Tampa Bay Bucks, and the Tennessee Titans. And then we'll wrap up in the following episode, the 2 episodes later, with the final 3, the Bengals, the Rams, and the Kansas City Chiefs. Reverse order, obviously. But we're getting close to the finish line. We are getting close to that finish line right there, Maggle, with our March Madness, our season recaps. And I hope you're enjoying them so far. But that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in into this fine episode 96 of this freezing cold podcast. Make sure you tune into the podcast however you can and wherever you can, whether it's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor FM, and Google Podcasts. And follow the show on social media on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports in the fridge, icy and spicy, like that Very Cold Lasagna. And until next time, who knows what the next move in free agency, but we'll see. But until then, peace out.